Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. This meeting is being live streamed and will be made available on the Council website for public viewing. Could I remind members to follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off their video when you're not addressing the meeting. Should you wish to contribute to any item, you should write "Speak" in the Teams chat function, and you'll be invited to speak in order about new issues. Should your question or issue be raised by a previous speaker, please withdraw your request so that we deal with the business as efficiently as possible. The usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by a roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting for any reason, I can remind you to either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time, or you could write "Leave" in the Teams chat function and then join. This will allow us to monitor members' presence. Tracy, can you confirm Sedrent and I do approve remote participation of members in this meeting today?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. We've got 17 members present in total, 10 members present in Council HQ, being the Chair, the Vice Chair, Councillor Beretti, Councillor John Campbell, Councillor Dashper, Councillor Dinelli, Councillor Dybra, Councillor Hislop, Councillor McFarlane and Councillor Thompson, and we've got 7 members present on Microsoft Teams, being Councillor Blake, Councillor Drysdale, Councillor Giusti, Councillor Hill, Councillor Howie, Councillor Marshall and Councillor Wood. 3 members not present, being Councillor Ian Crothers, Councillor David Slater and Councillor Keith Walters, and we've currently got 1 vacancy, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Are there any declarations of interest, members? Oh, Andrew?
Thanks, Chair. So I've got an interest in item 5 as I called it in. I believe I'll have the opportunity to talk to that for 3 minutes, I believe. I'll not take part in discussions afterwards, and I'll not take a part in the decision making, but I'll remain in the Teams meeting.
Thanks, Andrew. And can members please wait until they're invited to speak? I had a member in the chamber that indicated first he wanted to speak, but thanks, that's noted, Andrew. Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, item number 10 is something that I've petitioned against prior to being elected.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest? Okay, members, there are no minutes for this meeting today, so I will now ask Tracy to outline the procedure to be followed at today's meeting. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks, Chair. The Planning Applications Committee will consider each application in turn as detailed on the agenda. The case officer or other appointed officer will make a short presentation addressing the determining issues accompanied by digital images. Any late information, amendments or corrections will be reported at this time. Members may ask questions of officers following the presentation on points of clarification. The Chairman has been provided with a list of eligible representatives who have registered to speak at this meeting within the period specified in Council policy. No other persons will be allowed to speak. The Chairman will individually invite those who have registered in advance to speak to make their presentation, after which they may be questioned by committee members. No questions may be asked of members. The order of eligible parties being heard will be as follows: third parties objecting to an application, third parties supporting an application, statutory consultees objecting to an application, elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee, and such members should withdraw from the meeting after making their presentation, and applicants or their agents. Representatives were offered the option of attending today's meeting in person, via Microsoft Teams remotely, or to provide a written statement to be read out on their behalf. And a copy of the public speaking list is available from the committee officer taking notes of our proceedings. Presentations will be strictly limited to 3 minutes per person, except for national and major developments, which by their very nature are more complex, and the time limit will be 5 minutes. The Chairman of the committee will ask you to come to a conclusion if you take too long. Representatives are encouraged to use the time allotted to clarify any points they consider material and address the determining issues. Certain matters are not normally material planning considerations and will not be taken into account by the Council when deciding on a planning application. Representatives should not raise any new matters without explaining why they were not raised earlier with the case officer. Please do not repeat what is in the report, as members will have already read the report. After all representations have been heard, the meeting is then in formal session and no members of the public may address the committee from the public gallery. The Planning Applications Committee will then proceed to determine the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Tracy. And I see a note in the Teams that Councillor Drydale has asked to declare an interest in agenda item 7. She has petitioned against it in the past, so thanks for that, Pauline.
That might be 10.
Or is it 10?
It's the exempt item, I think, Chair.
It'll be 10. Okay. Thanks for that, David, and thanks for that correction. It's agenda item 10, Pauline. And thanks, Councillor Giusti, for your chat's message as well. Okay, members, move on to agenda item number 3. Planning application for the proposal. Erection of 8 wind turbines up to 135 metres to blade tip and ancillary infrastructure, including transformers, kiosks, crane, hard standings, control building, substation, 2 permanent anemometer masts, maximum height 80 metres, 4 borer pits, 2 temporary construction compounds, and formation of access tracks and associated works, at variance with condition 2. Condition requires commencement of development within 3 years. To extend this to 5 years of planning permission 15/B/4/0273, section 42, at land forming part of Loganhead Commercial Forestry Plantation, approximately 4 kilometres to the northwest of Langham and 15 kilometres to the northeast of Lockerbie. So the application type is section 42. The recommendation is to approve subject conditions, and the case officer is Chris McTeer. Chris, would you like to take us through your presentation, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just for members, before I begin my presentation, 2 points of clarification. In the committee papers, it should say crane hard standings. It says crane hand standings. There's no acrobatics in this one. It's a typo, plain and simple. The second clarification is the decision we're recommending approval subject to conditions. There is a section 75 attached to the original permission, which will need to be amended. So it's a willingness to approve subject to conditions and completion of an updated section 75. So that's my 2 clarifications. Just to begin with, if we can move on to the first slide, please, which is the only slide. The application is in front of us today as it's constituting major development under the scheme of delegation. All applications for major development have to come in front of the Council's Planning Applications Committee. It is also made under Section 42 of the Town and Country Planning Act, which is determination of applications to develop land without compliance with conditions previously attached. As outlined in paragraph 1.2 in your committee papers, the proposal relates to an extant planning permission originally submitted back in 2015, which was issued in 2019 following completion of the legal agreement that was attached to it. So members, returning members of the Planning Applications Committee will be familiar with Section 42 applications, but just for the benefit of newer members of the committee, we're not looking at the principle of the application here. We are looking only at the conditions that were attached to this wind farm previously. In this case, it was a condition which gave 5 years for, it was a time-limited condition specifying a certain number of years for commencement of the development. Given changes to council policy and planning policy more widely on a sort of national basis, we no longer attach this type of condition to planning applications for wind farms or any other planning application for that matter. So the way that we would deal with this nowadays would be to attach an informative the permission, which is the recommendation today, and for the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that we approve this, subject to the conditions as outlined in the report, and the completion of an updated Section 75. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. And there's also Section 75. You touched on that last. Yes, okay. Any questions for the case officer? Councillor Thompson, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. So in effect, were we to agree this today as recommended, what would be the effective time limit, if you like? I'm looking through the report. Obviously, while this was submitted in 2015, it was agreed in 2017. So presumably the permission would have expired in December this year, had it not been for this renewal, if I'm understanding it correctly. So it's really just, if we agree it today, what does that actually mean in real terms for the time limit?
Yeah, you're right. Effectively, it just it extends the period of which they can begin construction of this wind farm. So yes, that's effectively what would happen. It's more or less a renewal of the permission.
And in terms of the actual date, so would that be 5 years from this date?
It would be the date from which we issued the permission.
David, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to clarify as well, because a new Section 75 planning obligation will be required, it would not be from the meeting date today, it'll be whenever that is concluded, and that can take a little bit of time, but it'll be 5 years from when that is concluded and the permission is issued.
And just to satisfy Stephen, I take it they won't wait 5 years before they agree the Section 75 condition?
No, there's a normal requirement that it has to be concluded within 6 months of the decision, which would be today.
All right, thanks, Stephen. Councillor Campbell, John, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a quick one. My understanding is, would this be deemed as a new application? If that's the case, in the consultation, was the council's landscape architect consulted on, like we normally do on other wind farms? Thanks.
Chris?
During the course of the initial application, yes, they were, but since there's no change to this, it's the scheme as it was submitted then, so we didn't need to consult her with that one. She's got enough to be getting on with just now.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, John. Andy McFarlane.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a quick query as I'm new to this. Reading through the papers last night in the planning history, that said in 2014 we said that there'd be 130 metres to tip height. In 2015 it went to 135, and in 2021 it's gone to 200 metres. Are those variations, are those separate applications, and where are we at with that just now? Are we approving the 200 or not approving? Thanks, Chair.
Chris?
Good questions. Going back to 2014, there were different. The application that we're looking at is 135. I think what you're looking at from 2014 were the original scoping opinions. So generally, before development of this type comes in, the applicant would engage with us in a scoping exercise where we look at a certain proposal, and we look at the things that we can scope out of the application or the EIA that comes in with the application. So I think originally those were 130 metres. In the planning history that you can see, the 2021 reference is, it's not a planning application per se, it's a consultation from the Scottish Government for what we call a Section 36 wind farm. So those are wind farms where the expected output is more than 50 megawatts and the council aren't the decision makers. In that case, it's the Scottish Government. So there is a consultation in just now, but just we're looking at the original planning application from 2015 as we issued in 2019. So we're not looking at the 200 metre turbines. That'll come before a committee at another date.
Thanks, Andy. Any other questions for the case officer? In that case, members, were in session. Councillor Dryborough.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And this is in my ward, and I was part of the original decision making in 2015. I think Muirhall Energy should be congratulated on the way that they've actually consulted with the locals in the particular area, and I would wish all wind farm companies would be the same way. There is obviously other wind farms which this organisation actually are in charge of, and I'm really pleased with the way things have went with this. So I have no hesitation in approving the recommendation as is in the paper, Chair.
Thanks very much. Archie? Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, just happy to second.
Thanks very much, that's helpful. Any other alternative views? In that case, it's a unanimous decision of this committee. Can you confirm the decision, please, Tracy?
Thank you, Chair. So members have agreed a willingness to approve the application subject to the conditions detailed in the report, along with the updated Section 75 obligation.
Thanks very much. I also omitted to mention at the commencement of the meeting that I have agreed to accept an additional late representation for agenda item number 4, with a statement read out by our clerk Tracy, and Emma and I have agreed to accept an exempt item. Some of you will have had the documents given to you, some other members will have them electronically sent. Only the 9 members that made the decision earlier will be able to determine or debate the exempt item, but all members are entitled to remain should they so wish. So at the conclusion of the official meeting, which is agenda item 10, I will call a 15-minute recess. That will give some members the opportunity to read the 3-page document. That's the important part of the agenda item, which is exempt, although there are numerous other attachments provided, I think 106 pages in total, Tracy, but we can deal with that when we arrive at that stage at the commencement of the exempt item. Councillor Campbell?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there, Chair. It's just a bit unfortunate when the electronic one was sent out, some members didn't get it, but I believe that those are new members that's on the panel and they can't take part anyway, but I'll leave it until we get to that item. Thanks, Chair.
Excellent. Thanks very much, John. Okay, then we'll move on with the official or the agenda we have before us. So agenda item number 4, a planning application for the installation of 2 bollards at Harbour Slipway, Portpatrick Harbour, South Crescent, Portpatrick, Stranraer. This is a full application, reference number 21/2033/full. The recommendation is approved unconditionally, and the case officer is Tracy Carnegie. Are you taking this, David? No, Tracy. Tracy with us? Morning, Tracy. Are you with us?
Yes, Chair.
Excellent. Okay. Just when you're ready, we take us through your presentation, please, Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. If we could have please. So the application site comprises the South Harbour Quayside Slipway, which is shown outlined in red on the location plan. Next slide, please. The location of the proposed bollards are shown on the block plan as 2 small circles. Next slide, please. The image on the left of the screen shows the type of bollard that's proposed, which is a heritage design, and the bollards are about 1 metre, just under 1 metre above ground level, their full height. Next slide, please. The fixing detail that's proposed is the detail shown far right, which comprises a socket and cover plate system. Bollards would have a nimbus grey colour finish. I'm not sure how clear the writing on the colour swatches will come up on the slide, so for the avoidance of doubt, the nimbus grey swatch is the swatch that immediately to the left of the red swatch. Next slide, please. This shows an image of the slipway from the north. You can see in this photograph the existing unauthorised bollards, which don't form part of the current application and which the applicant has advised are to be removed. Next slide, please. This image shows the keep clear area at the top of the slipway where vehicles are able to stop at the public road before navigating the slipway. Next slide, please. This image shows a side-on view of the slipway. The site plan which has been provided indicates that the position of the new bollards would be approximately level with where the side of quayside narrows in this picture. Next slide, please. Just another view of the slipway from the public road. Again, the proposed location of the bollards, as indicated in the site, would be approximately just to the right-hand side of the bin that you can see in the photograph. Next slide, please. This image shows the existing harbour railings and some other street furniture that's within the immediate locality. The applicant has indicated the amended heritage design and colour of bollards was chosen to assimilate the existing railing and the street furniture in the locality. Next slide, please. The applicant has provided a video clip showing one of the incidents that occurred last year where a vehicle became stuck whilst trying to either launch or recover a vessel, which resulted in the tow rope breaking and the rope travelling a fair distance to the beach and out and onto the public road. If we could play that clip, please. Next slide, please. The key considerations in the assessment of the application were sizing and design, historic environment, good risk, road safety, access, and the recommendation to improve the application and what would be the as stated within paragraph 4.12 of the handling. Thank you, Chair.
Audio. Oh, thanks very much, Tracy. Unfortunately, the audio was not very good, but hopefully members did manage to follow your presentation. So, thanks for that, Tracy. Any members with any questions for the case officer? Ivor, please.
Ms Carnegie may have said it, but it was, like you said, slightly different. Are the existing bollards being removed? There was 3 on one of the pictures. Or were they not in line with that? Are they further out?
David or Tracy?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the 3 bollards are unauthorised. Excuse me, are unauthorised, and the applicant has confirmed that they would be removed. So what you're talking about is purely the 2 proposed ones, which aren't in any of the slides, and are set back 3.5 metres from where the other ones are.
Thanks, Ivor. Any other questions for the case officer? Any other questions for the case officer? Stephen Thompson, please.
Thanks, Chair. It was just, there is a little paragraph there at 2.5 just to do with the right of way, and obviously that might sort of attract the interest of sort of local residents, but clearly, well, I presume rights of way don't extend to motorised vehicles. It's really about pedestrian or bicycle or horse access, presumably along a right of way. So that's not something that this committee needs to determine, but presumably as an authority we would be investigating that.
I'm sure our legal expert Laura will be able to help us. There is certainly an established right in law for some vehicles and pedestrians. Laura, can you help us, please?
Certainly, thank you, Chair. If there is an established right of way which can be used by vehicles, then that would enable vehicles to use that path. Rights of ways are established on a hierarchy. If it's only ever been pedestrians, then it's pedestrians that get to use them. But as you go up the chain, if you've got vehicles have used it for 20 years and fulfil the other criteria, then there is a vehicular public right of way.
Yeah, no, I hadn't appreciated that there was a hierarchy like that, so that's helpful. I think in the report it suggests that it's not fatal, is what it says, that the alleged public right-of-way is investigated, because I think it's assumed that it's assumed that it's not for vehicles, it's for you know, pedestrians, if you like.
Oh, sorry, I'm dead in the mute.
I believe
Get that, Laura, yes.
I believe we're going to hear more in this from representations, but my understanding is that it has been alleged that there is a vehicular right-of-way.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful, Laura. I think then what we'll do is we'll go to the representations and then we can have discussion with members and Laura. Once we've heard the representations, we'll go into session. So if there are no other questions for our case officer, we'll go to the representations. So we now have 2 representations to be read out by Tracy, and then an agent speaking on behalf of the applicant, Mr Curry, will address the committee. So Tracy, when you're ready, and confine them to 3 minutes, please, on each of the representations.
Thanks, Chair. First statement is from Mr Denham, objector. I wish to make the following observations to the applications made, and would request that they are taken into consideration by the Planning Applications Committee in arriving at their decision to refuse or accept the applications. Suitability for the current bollards for the location. The current bollards are not suitable due to their metal core and manufacturers, Broxap, and do not recommend them for this location. There is no mention in the application of proposed signage to advise how visitors get access to the ramp to launch a boat. The applicants have stated that they will not be able to attend the unblocking of the bollards for every request due to their commitments of the volunteers of the Patrick Harbour Community Benefit Society. The introduction of lockable bollards will block an established right of way public access. The ramp at the South Crescent is owned by Patrick Community Harbour Society, the applicants. Up until the 24th of July 2021, the public had free and unhindered access over the ramp to the beach. This right has been exercised certainly as far back as the 1970s, and I am sure further back than that. I have personally launched various boats by using the ramp since the late 1980s, creating a prescriptive period of use in excess of 20 years. Legislatively, the right of access is limited to pedestrian access. However, in the case of Cole versus Robertson, the very issue of right of access in harbour environment was established. This states that whilst the right to roam legislation does not apply for vehicles where there has been use by vehicles for the prospective period of 20 years, a public right of way of vehicles can be established. In this situation, we have an established right of way over the ramp for vehicles, and the applicant cannot block that right of way by the installation of lockable bollards. The legal opinion obtained by the Society does not make any reference to this established legal decision, and it can only be viewed that the Society's legal advisor was unaware of this reported legal case law. Nonetheless, the established case law requires to be considered by the committee in arriving at their decision due to the legal ramifications that such an established right of way has on the planning authority. Section 46 of the Countryside Act Scotland 1967, as amended, states, "It shall be the duty of the local planning authority to assert, protect and keep open and free from obstruction or encroachment any public right of way which is wholly or partly within their area. And they may, for these purposes, institute and defend legal proceedings and generally take such steps as they may deem expedient. The bollards will not prevent a recurrence of reported incidents. The bollards will not prevent any incidents occurring. All they will do is prevent the occasional vehicle access to launch a boat. The applicants do not have any form of health and safety policy, nor are they insured to cover this operation, and there is no certification or testing that can be carried out to see if a potential user of the ramp has the necessary experience or safe equipment to do so. This is the very reason why the applicants have submitted the applications. Thank you for listening and considering my concerns." And the second objection is from David Telfer. I refer to the above application, which I now understand is to be heard at the committee on Thursday the 9th. As the Chair of Patrick Community Development Trust, I am an interested party but received no notification on. We have already lodged an objection but would wish to make it clear that we have grave concerns about this restriction to public access and the removal of an established right-of-way. The applicant is citing health and safety as their excuse for restricting access to the public beach. Firstly, from the plans, it is not at all clear that the PHCBS have any ownership of the land on which the bollards are placed. It is represented as a single line joining two land holdings either side of the harbour. Secondly, we have severe restrictions, reservations about the motivation of the society. Although health and safety is cited as the motivation, this puts the PHCBS in the position of policing who can and cannot access the beach. This smacks more of a wish to control access, especially as the PHCBS does not have so much as a health and safety policy covering the harbour and the various activities that take place there. We do not think that Dumfries and Galloway Council should in any way grant PHCBS the right to control access to Portpatrick Beach, as it is not clear if they own the slip and most certainly do not own access to the beach. This is a long-established right-of-way and a community asset. To give PHCBS control over this goes well beyond a right to place bollards on their land. We object in the strongest possible terms.
Thanks very much, Tracy. And as these are written objections, there is not an opportunity to discuss or comment upon them. They're simply for us to note. Councillor Dennerley.
I definitely understand those concerns and agree, because there definitely is a health and safety issue. If there's an emergency and the ambulance can't access the beach, then it's a risk to people's safety. So we have to consider a risk assessment in this situation and how emergency services couldn't access the beach if there were bollards there.
Thank you. We will come back to that question when we are in session to discuss the application itself. These are currently objections. We still have to hear the agent on behalf of the applicant, and then we'll go into a more general debate. Thank you. So now we have the agent for the applicant, Tracy Hughes. Tracy, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Tracy, I'm sure you know the procedure, but you will have 3 minutes to make your presentation on behalf of the applicant. When you've concluded, I'd be grateful if you'd remain with us in case members of the committee have questions for you. And after that, you can watch the rest of the proceedings, but that will be your involvement ended at that point. So whenever you're ready, Tracy, thank you. Just go ahead.
Thank you.
So you can go ahead anytime, Tracy, and I'll remind you of 30 seconds to go to draw your presentation to a conclusion.
That's fine. Thank you. My name is Tracy Hughes. I'm a planning consultant. We were appointed in May this year to provide professional planning advice to the Portpatrick Harbour Community Benefit Society, the owners of the application site, and I'm speaking on their behalf today. Built in the 1800s, the slipway at Portpatrick Harbour remains an important working feature of the harbour today, as it did when it was originally built. It is currently used for launching directly into Portpatrick Harbour, in addition to laying up, storing and repairing vessels on it. The slipway requires both constant maintenance and management by the Harbour Society to ensure that it works efficiently without causing danger to either users of the slipway or members of the public in the vicinity, such as the beach, promenade, car park or public highway. The Society is aware of a number of occasions where unsolicited vehicular access was gained to the slipway and has led to unregulated situations. These gave rise to serious risk and danger to the health and safety of the public. And as a responsible landowner, the Society cannot ignore these situations. The submitted video clip taken from CCTV evidences such an incident, which took place last year, and the severity of the risk to public health and safety that necessitated the installation of the bollards and the consequent planning application before you today. In recognition of these issues and concerns, the present arrangements for launching from the slipway or gaining access for carrying out maintenance or repairs to any vessel on it can therefore be gained by contacting the Harbour Authority to request access. The current arrangements are working well. The application for planning permission before you today seeks to formally regularise this position and takes note of representations received in terms of material and colour. As such, the bollards are considered a proportionate solution to managing risk to public health and safety, ensuring that there is no dereliction of duty as the landowner, and are proportionate to the context as they are kept to a minimum area and designed to be a respectful addition to the historic harbour. As set out at 4.11 and 12 of the officer report, both the applicant and the planning officer are mindful that a representation has been made in respect of legal issues stemming from the Countryside Act and the Land Reform Act concerning right of access.
Go, Tracy.
For the avoidance of any doubt, the Harbour Society have engaged with the Council on this separate legal issue and are confident that by installing the removable bollards, the Harbour Society are responsibly fulfilling their statutory duties as a landowner, promoting and encouraging legitimate public right of access to the area, whilst simultaneously ensuring public safety, which, up until the installation of the bollards, has been compromised. Ultimately, the planning officer rightly concludes that such matters are out with the scope of a planning assessment, and regardless of views on this legal issue, a decision made by members today would not prejudice the Council in addressing those issues under a separate legislative regime. As members will note from paragraph 4.14 of the officer's report, the application has been recommended for approval. The proposals are acceptable in planning terms, and there are no material considerations which would prevent the proposals from being approved unconditionally, and we respectfully ask the Planning Committee to approve this planning application.
That your presentation concluded, Tracy. Thank you for that. There was one question by Councillor Dennerley about the restriction of emergency access vehicles where these bollards to be approved. Do you have any observations on that on behalf of your applicant?
It's my understanding that the Coast Guard and other emergency services have keys for the bollards and are able to access at any time. There is also signage around the bollards with the contact number, so people when they attend the site can phone for immediate access.
Thank you. Any other questions for the agent, Councillor Dryborough?
Yes, thanks very much for your presentation. There is concern, as you've probably heard from one of the objectors, about getting access to the slipway from members of the public who may actually want to take their vessels out or in. That's down to the Harbour Trust at the end of the day, who are in charge of the harbour, I would imagine. But can you confirm that there will be access available for the public to get access to any vessels in and out of the harbour?
Absolutely. It's not my client's desire to restrict or to somehow dictate who can or cannot access. The whole point is to ensure that people that are using the slipway are doing so correctly and appropriately and have necessary insurances in place. They're purely acting as responsible landowners.
Thanks, Tracy. Councillor McFarlane. Andy?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Morning, Tracy. Yes, you said in your presentation that the current arrangements were working well. I'd be interested to know what working well looks like as far as the applicant's concerned. And also you mentioned it was acting in relation to health and safety, and we've heard from the objectors that there is no health and safety guidelines in place, or they don't have a health and safety policy in place. So again, if you could expand on that, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Tracy, you can, but we try and confine ourselves to planning matters, and some of them might not be planning matters, Andy. But if you can help, Tracy, that would be useful.
Yes, certainly. I'm sure David Sussy can advise on what is and what isn't planning matters. But in terms of accessing, there have been boats that have been brought along, and the owners have contacted the society in advance, and arrangements have been made for them to successfully load and unload their boats. That's purely what we mean. It's a simple process.
Thanks for that, Tracy. Councillor Thompson, Stephen, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm trying to just come to terms with the nature of the bollards themselves. So there seems to be a view that they won't restrict emergency access, but there does seem to be an intention that they should be locked in place. But then later on in the report, and this is where I'm just trying to tease out this flexibility, if you like, that the advice seems to be that they shouldn't be locked in place, or indeed that would be a directive we would need to consider while we investigated the access issues separately to the planning permission if granted. So is the intention still to lock the bollards in place by your applicant, given the advice that follows later in the report? If that could be put to the agent, please.
Tracy.
The intent is that the bollards should be locked.
Okay, thank you.
Did you want to come back, Stephen, or are you just content with that reply?
All I wanted to know was what the position of the applicant was, but obviously we can get into that in session, I think.
Thank you. So are there any other questions for the applicant's agent? In that case, Tracy, thanks very much for being with us today. Thanks for your presentation, and thanks for your responses to the questions set by members. Okay, members, we're now in session. Councillor Dryborough.
Yeah, Chair, obviously there's concern. I mean, the video clip itself, I mean, I was concerned myself just watching the video clip with the chain actually breaking and access to and from that, and the way that the vessels are actually coming up and down. The agent has clarified the situation with the bollards. I was a bit concerned about the public standing next to that chain and where the health and safety side of things actually is with that, but that would come under the health and safety policy of the organisation rather than the planning side of things. So, you know, with regard to the actual planning application itself, I think there has been, you know, quite a lot discussed about the access to and from the slipway. Certainly members of the public who are walking will have access to it. If there is an agreement from, you know, the Harbour Community Trust, whatever they're called, they will in plenty of time open up the slipway for vessels, and of course there's connection to emergency vehicles as well. So with that in mind, Chair, I would suggest we go with the recommendations and let the council get on with the other legal stuff with the Harbour Trust.
Thanks, Councillor Dryborough. I'm sure it was a rope, no a chain, but apart from that, your observations are right. Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think I do have concerns about the bollards potentially being locked, given the advice that we've got at 4.12 in the report and the suggested directives that it has there. Firstly, to give the directive that if planning permission is implemented, the proposed bollards should remain unlocked pending the conclusion of the access authority's investigation into the public right-of-way. So effectively the bollards could be put in place but remain unlocked until that's concluded, which would seem to be sensible given the concerns, and allow us to act as an access authority, if you like. And similarly, that if we do grant permission, it would be without prejudice to any future action that we may need to take in terms of the access authority, again, which is highlighted in 4.12. So I appreciate directives aren't the same as conditions, and maybe David might be able to clarify what exactly that might mean, but I would rather than just go approve, I would rather have some protection in place that we could still approve in light of those directives.
Thanks for that. I would be reluctant to add conditions that were not reasonable, but David, can you help Stephen?
Yes, there was considerable discussion with legal services and indeed the access officer before we came to paragraph 411 and 412. I think what I'm keen to do, and a number of members have alluded to this, is to try and separate the planning issues from the access issues. So really what the committee is looking at is the physical appearance, the actual structure which is going into the listed structure. Is it acceptable? There is this issue as set out in 411 about the tension, if you like, between the 1967 Countryside Act and then the 2003 Land Reform Act, where the Access Authority has been really passed on to, it's no longer the planning authority to deal with that, we have access officers who deal with it. The reason for concluding that it should be a directive is it is advice only, it's not enforceable. I would strongly advise against putting a condition on there because I don't think it would meet the terms of Circular 4, 1998, which sets out the 6 tests of conditions. It would not really be enforceable or reasonable, I would suggest. But, Chair, with your agreement, it might be worth bringing Laura in at this point just to actually expand on that a bit further.
I see Laura's looking to come in anyway. The only thing I will say as well before Laura speaks is I wouldn't want members to get hung up on emergency services access. In a previous life, I drove a fire appliance and I would never drive it onto sand. And neither, I think, with an ambulance driver, they would find another means of getting to a casualty and dealing with them rather than drive vehicles doing a slipway onto sand. But on the back of that, Laura, can you help Stephen Thompson with his inquiry, please, and with the observations David has made?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We had extensive conversations, myself and David and the case officer and the access officer on this one. And what was agreed was that this is a consideration. It's unfortunate that the previous legislation, which put the duty with respect to rights of way on planning authorities, hadn't been altered when the new 2003 legislation came in. At the moment, it's not the planning authority who would carry out any access investigations. It would be the access authority. And when I say access investigations, I am including rights of way. If these bollards were in place and not locked, they would be the same as a gate which is unlocked. It would not be an obstruction to a right of way. And that is why the directive is there. It's appreciated that they are still in position on an alleged right of way, but if they are not locked, they are not an obstruction. That said, it has not yet been shown that there is definitely a right of way. In Scotland, unlike England, rights of way don't have to be registered on a map. They don't have to be vindicated in a court case. There is a criteria, and if it fits the criteria, it is a right of way. And quite often, they just go along in life without being recorded, without being registered, until there is a pinch point such as this, where there's an obstruction on them. And that's then when people start looking to see whether or not it is an actual right of way. Although a directive is not enforceable, if this is found to be a right of way, and my understanding is that the Access Authority are going to carry out an evidence of use inquiry to establish if there is a right of way for vehicles. If there is a right of way and if these bollards are obstructing that right of way, then the Council as Access Authority would still have the power to take enforcement action on.
Thanks, Laura. 2 questions for you then. Firstly, would our decision today, and I know the answer, but I just make it in broad terms, would any decision today cause an issue further down the line for the Council? In other words, if we made a decision, would that compromise our investigation further on? And secondly, would delaying a decision until an investigation has been concluded by the access officer or other departments be beneficial, or is this a standalone inquiry that would not impinge on any other activity that's taking place in other departments through the Council?
Thank you. We've made it quite clear in the report that the Council intends to carry out an evidence of use investigation, so the planning permission, if granted, is without prejudice to the outcome of that investigation. If planning permission was granted today, it would not prevent enforcement action by the Council. As I say, it is unfortunate that the older legislation still refers to the planning authority. If this were planning permission for a building, which then was being erected, I think that would take us into different considerations, because then we would be asking somebody to knock down a building potentially. Whereas what we're dealing with here are 2 bollards, which can be easily removed if it is found that they are obstructions to an asserted right of way.
Thanks, Laura. That's helpful. Stephen Thompson, well, I've got a few members. I take it you're just continuing on with your question, are you? And then I've got four other members looking to speak. So, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. And it was really just to say, and that's very helpful to hear that from our solicitor. I would, in that case, want to move that we do approve, but basically based on the conclusion at 414 with those directives, because I think it would be helpful if we were able to articulate that we had regard for those concerns without it standing in the way of planning permission, if that makes sense. Thank you.
That's really helpful, Stephen. Thank you. I've got Councillor Dennerley, Campbell, Hislop and Giusti in that order. Councillor Dennerley.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask for clarification before we make the decision. With what happened to the car being towed out, is this a standalone case, or has this been happening a lot? And my second point is, at Portpatrick Harbour, the Portpatrick Harbour Trust, who are going to be responsible for the control of the bollards, meaning that when people want access, they can call this trust. Are they part-time or full-time, and are they a 24-hour service that people can call at any time to have access to remove these bollards? Thank you.
I'll ask David and Laura between them to respond to Councillor Dennerley. David or Laura?
I would certainly say that the second issue to do with whether or not they're a 24-hour service, that's not a material planning consideration. There may be health and safety issues with that, but it's not something which the Council as planning authority can take into consideration. It's more to do with the actual ownership and how they respond to it. I don't know if Laura wants to add anything to that.
Well, I think the other thing is we would have no way of determining how many other incidents had taken place. I think that was Councillor Dennerley's first question. Laura?
Yes, thank you, Chair. With respect to the first question, I would suggest that that's not a planning matter. What we're looking at here is the bollards and whether they're suitable on planning grounds. The frequency of these incidents are maybe a motivation for the application, but they're not a planning consideration in itself. Similarly, as David has said, the second issue of how people are able to get in touch with the people in control of the bollards, it's not a planning matter. It is, however, a consideration for the access authority, because if a right-of-way is established, it's unqualified. Whereas if you've got somebody that has got a gate or other obstruction on a right-of-way, and they then start trying to impose conditions upon whether or not they'll open it, then that is an obstruction to a right-of-way, but that would be for the access authority as part of the investigations.
Thanks very much, Laura. And challenging it is, I'm sure we'll all get to a stage where we know what is a planning matter and what isn't. But thanks very much for that response, Laura, and thanks, Councillor Dennerley. I've got Councillor Campbell, Councillor withdrawing his request, then Councillor Giusti. So we have a proposal and a seconder in place of these two speakers, and then we'll go to determination. Councillor Campbell, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, I'm kind of reluctant to put any sort of unreasonable conditions, and I'm content with the directives in paragraph 4.12 after listening to Laura's legal advice, and I'm quite happy to second Councillor Dryborough's motion to go with the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Campbell. I think Stephen Thompson have already done that, but aye, thank you. Have you, Stephen?
I think I have, yeah.
Right, okay. Well, we'll concede and let Councillor Campbell be the seconder. So last
Chair,
speaker.
I didn't quite actually hear him say he seconded it. He said he would support it, but he didn't say who seconded it.
That's fine, aye. That's fine. Thanks, folks. Well, you're now the formal seconder, Councillor Campbell. I've got Councillor Juice as the last speaker. Andrew? Oh, you've withdrawn. Okay. So, Councillor Juice and Councillor withdrawn their request to speak. So, unless there's an alternative proposal, we will agree the recommendation as set out in the papers. Can you confirm the decision of the committee, please, Tracy?
Mr Chair, yes, members have agreed to approve the application unconditionally with the directive to be attached, which is detailed in 4.12 of the report.
Thank you. Move on to agenda item number 5. An application for the erection of dwelling house for use as holiday letting accommodation and installation of septic tank and soak away and roof mounted solar panels at site adjacent to the Cot House, Bride Farm, Port Logan. The application type's full application reference number 21/2445/full. Recommendation is to refuse, and the case officer is Iona Brooke. Iona, if you're with us.
Hello there, Mr Chair.
Oh, hi, Iona. Good morning. Just take us through your presentation when you're ready, please. Thanks, Iona.
Thank you, Chair. Could I have the next slide, please? Right, the application before us is for the erection of a new dwelling house in the countryside for a short-term holiday letting accommodation. It is currently a greenfield site utilised for agricultural purposes associated with Bride Farm, which lies in a remote and rural area in the southwest of the Rings. Next slide. The design before us is a fairly typical modern three-bedroom bungalow, which would be accessed via an existing farm gate. Next slide. The image before you shows the access road down to Kirkbride Farm, taken from the B7065 public road. Next slide. This is standing on the access road, looking towards the access gate, which would be utilised to serve the development, looking into the site. Next slide. This is standing within the site, looking northwest. Next slide. This is, again, within the site, looking southwest towards the public road, which lies parallel to the stone dyke you see to the rear of that picture. Next slide. This is, again, in the site, looking northeast over Luce Bay. And finally, the last slide. This is looking southeast towards the access road and the access gate. Next slide, please. As the proposal meets all the expectations for a dwelling house, the primary policy the application should be considered against is H3 housing in the countryside, which sets out specific circumstances where a new house in the countryside may be appropriate. The current proposal fails to accord with any of the criteria within policy H3 and therefore is contrary to the terms of the development plan, and members are respectfully requested to refuse it. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Iona. Any questions for our case officer? Councillor Hislop?
It's with regard to the tests under H3, the one that is essential for the needs of agriculture or other business requiring a rural location. If you're looking at holiday accommodation in rural locations as a business, would a rural location not be essential for having holiday accommodation in it?
Iona?
It has not been demonstrated that it is essential for the purposes of this proposal. As policy H3 does say, I'll just read out the considerations, that it would essential for the needs of business, is a single house associated with it, is not involve a beneficial redevelopment of a brownfield site, etc. There is a list of criteria which could be met. In this instance, there's been no justification as to why it would be essential for the needs of agricultural or other businesses requiring a rural location So therefore, we cannot support it because there has been no submission to justify it in that instance.
Thanks, Iona. I think as well, and I'm sure David will correct me, this is simply, although it's described as a holiday letting, in fact, it's simply a house in the countryside. David?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is actually the nub of the argument, I would say. There's a piece of legislation called the Town and Country Planning Use Classes Scotland Order 1997. It's referred to in paragraph 4.9. And a dwelling house falls into class 9. There is no different use class for a dwelling house to be used as holiday accommodation. So in other words, this would be a completely unrestricted house in open countryside, and the policy ED9 on tourism does not allow or facilitate sporadic development of an individual house. It looks for tourist facilities, and basically this, I think, from the slides Iona's just shown you, is very much a house in splendid isolation in the open countryside. So this house, basically, if it was granted, the description might say as holiday letting accommodation, but it could not be conditioned or restricted to that. So effectively, you'd be granting a house which could be sold on the open.
To come back.
I was just, the clarification by the officer that there had been no supporting evidence was enough to satisfy me in that. But the other thing was, we used to put conditions on that if it was a holiday let, there was only a certain amount of time people could stay. Was it 6 months or something? After that, they couldn't stay there any longer. Has that changed under the new LDPs as they've came along?
David?
Yes, that's not something that we normally advise now, simply because it's so difficult to enforce. Sorry, one thing I should have mentioned at the start of the item. The Chair spotted this typo as well. Paragraph 417, it talks about a principal economic benefactor. It should be beneficiary. So I apologise for missing that.
Thanks, David. Any other questions for our case officer? In that case, members were in session. Oh, Councillor Giusti, you also made a statement at the start that you wanted to make a statement and then leave. Is that right?
Well, I'll make a statement and I'll not take part in any of the discussions or in the decision making, but it's on Teams, so I'll not chat.
I think, Andrew, you have to withdraw. You can certainly rejoin afterwards, but I think when you make a statement, you can no longer remain at the meeting for the duration. Is that right, David, or am I wrong with that? Or Tracy, it should be Tracy, no David.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Giusti just called the application in. He can speak to the committee on the grounds that he called the application in, but he doesn't actually have to leave the meeting once he's done that. He can still remain.
All right, that's okay. I thought when members called in, they had to leave the meeting until that was determined. But okay, my apologies, Andrew. Oh, here's David. Sorry, I want to speak now. David?
Sorry, it's just to clarify that if any member has called in an application to committee and they sit in the Planning Applications Committee and their grounds for calling it in clearly show that they have got a predetermined view on that application, then the normal advice would be that they couldn't take part in that at all. But I note the wording that Councillor Giusti has used just indicate that it's got, I think the phrase was, it would be something which would be worth considering at the committee. So yeah, it would require the consideration of the Planning Applications Committee. He hasn't actually predetermined it from what I can see, so in my view, he'd be quite entitled to proceed.
Okay, Andrew, in that case, do you want to address the committee?
Just a wee point just before we go in, Chairman, it's maybe for future. If you're participating by teams, if I was to be in the committee chamber, I get leaving the committee chamber and going next door and watching it on the big screen. But otherwise, I wouldn't have a facility to go and watch this, otherwise, unless it went onto YouTube. So it's, I get the leaving the room, but I don't get leaving the Teams chat or the Teams meeting.
No, it's okay. We've established that's no necessary, Andrew. So just just do your presentation and then you can remain. That's quite acceptable.
No problem, Chair. Thank you very much. So yeah, so I've read the reason for recall. I think we need to kind of look at this under policy ED2, business development and diversification in the rural area. Proposals which expand existing business or create new ones in the rural area will be considered favourably, subject to other policies in the plan. There is a preference that this will generally be within or adjacent to existing settlements. Sites without web settlements may be acceptable where they offer opportunity to diversify an existing business or are related to a site-specific resource or opportunity. So a wee bit of history on this. There are already holiday cottages on this farm. So I think we created the basis that there is currently a business there that is already diversified, it's existing. So we have to look at it from that point of view. The land that is being repurposed is actually, I've got it written here, it's actually a rocky knoll, and it's not particularly good agricultural value, to be honest. As I said, there's a portfolio of holiday cottages, and this farmer has got experience in diversification in the tourism sector. He does it well. I think it would be good for the planning application I would suggest to the planning application that they maybe come down for a site visit and get an idea of the location before they make a decision on this. And I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Okay, and thanks for your presentation and observations. Okay, members, we are in session. Councillor Dryborough.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair, and obviously want that diversification in the countryside as much as possible in Dumfries and Galloway. I think the planning officer made it quite clear for me this is a house in the country at the end of the day, and you know, and Andrew said that it was quite a rocky crop and things like that, but it was certainly worthy of cattle to be on it, to be grass fed. So my concern here is that if we did, recommend this application, then we would be going against policy all over the place. So I would prefer to see this go with the recommendation as is stated in the report, Chair.
Thanks very much, Archie. Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, my concerns as well. It's a house in the countryside. I was looking at the initial plan there. I mean, if that's the application site, it looks huge. If you look at properties just further along that road, they're in small enclosures. They would make probably ideal holiday lets or whatever. But yeah, I would second Councillor Dryburgh's to go with the recommendations of the officer.
Thanks very much, Councillor Campbell. Any alternative proposals?
Stephen Thompson and then Ian Crouch.
Stephen?
It wasn't an alternative, but Councillor Campbell's thwarted me yet again. So it was really just to say, additionally, I mean, on the back of what Councillor Giusti had sort of introduced there, which was worthy of consideration, I think there was, I think it's sort of touched on in 4.10, whereas the application is as it is, and I think maybe if there had been an alternative use for grasslands or agricultural land, we would have expected to see the appropriate sort of evidenced case to support that change, because that's not what we're looking at today. So I would just go with the recommendations, but it's been seconded already, Chair. So
thanks very much, Stephen. That's helpful. Councillor Ian Carruthers, please.
Thanks, Chair. I was looking at the plan history of this, and it's quite extensive, as we can all see. So what I did wonder was, going back to Andrew's suggestion of a site visit, would it be worthwhile? I think it'd be an interesting case for all of us, and particularly the new ones, because we'll have a number of these type of cases coming back in front of us. Chair, it really sounds like somebody's got a mic on in that room. It's constantly echoing. You hardly hear what you lot are saying at times. I can hear the feedback from myself as well. So, but I mean, I would certainly think it's worthy of a site visit for the sake of nothing else. It'd be a good educational experience for all of us, and particularly the new ones. I would support that, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Carruthers. I have some worry about what it would achieve, because we're looking at a field in the middle of the countryside and there's an application for a house there, but by all means you've put it forward. If anybody wants to second that proposal. It seems not, Councillor Carruthers, so that proposal falls. And if there are no... Councillor Hill has seconded the proposal for a site visit. Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks, Chair. I don't think we need a site, and I think we've got enough information here to make a decision on this application.
Thank you. And Councillor Campbell?
I'll second Councillor Driver.
Thank you. And I see Sean Marshall wants to speak. I hope it's not on this matter because we've now have a proposal for a site visit and an amendment. So that's the first thing we deal before we go any further into the process. Sean?
Chair, it was really, I was going to second, there's no need for a site visit.
Thanks very much, Sean. So the motion is for a site visit by Councillor Colours, seconded by Councillor Hill. The amendment, we have enough information before us, is by Councillor Driver, seconded by Councillor Campbell. Do you take us through the process, Tracy, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Motion proposed by Councillor Colours, seconded by Councillor Hill, to defer consideration of this application to allow for a site visit to be arranged. An amendment proposed by Councillor Driver, seconded by Councillor Campbell, is to determine the application today without the need for a site visit. I'll proceed to the vote. Chairman?
Amendment.
Vice Chair?
Amendment.
Councillor Blake?
Motion.
Councillor Campbell?
Amendment.
Councillor Crothers?
Motion.
Councillor Dasper?
Amendment.
Councillor Dennerley?
Amendment.
Councillor Dryborough?
Amendment.
Councillor Drysdale?
Motion.
Councillor Giusti?
Abstain.
Councillor Hill?
Motion.
Councillor Howie?
Amendment.
Councillor Hislop?
Amendment.
Councillor McFarlane?
Amendment.
Councillor Marshall?
Amendment.
Councillor Thompson?
Amendment.
And Councillor Wood? Councillor Wood? I think he's left the meeting, Chair.
Okay, Tracy.
I'll just say, Chair, that I didn't include Councillor Beretti in the vote because he's still waiting to undertake his training for planning, so I have spoken to him offline, so that's why he's not taking part in the vote today. So the amendment carries 11 votes to 4. Amendment is carried and will be determined today without a site visit.
Thanks, Tracy. Councillor Dryborough?
Go with the original recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell?
Agreed.
If there are no alternative proposals, then it's a unanimous decision of the committee. Can you confirm the decision of the committee, please, Tracy?
Members have agreed to refuse the application on the grounds as detailed in the report.
Thank you. Move on to agenda item number 6. An application for restoration works to existing fountain and railings and associated works at Dumfries Fountain, junction of High Street and English Street, Dumfries. The application type's full planning permission, reference number 220681/full. Recommendations to approve subject to condition, and case officer is Lindsay Cameron. Hi Lindsay, good to see you. Will you take us through your presentation, please?
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Can I have the first slide, please? But just before I proceed with the presentation, there's just a few points of clarification. As detailed in paragraph 1.5 of the report, listed building consent for these restoration works was granted by this committee in March 2022. The associated application for planning permission was refused at the same committee solely on the basis of the proposed public artwork to be installed in the area to the northeast of the fountain. The public artwork previously proposed does not form part of the current application, which is for the alterations to the fountain only. And as set out at paragraph 3.1, no representations on valid planning grounds were received in respect of this application. While a number of representations were received in respect of the funding works, this is not a material planning consideration in the determination of this application. And moving on to the presentation, this first slide shows the application site in its position on the High Street in Dumfries that relates to the cast iron ornamental fountain and its immediate surroundings. Can I have the next slide, please? This is the proposed block plan, which shows the fountain in relation to the surrounding harbour landscape and street furniture, together with the proposed location of the new inspection chamber required for the water circulation system. Next slide, please. This slide shows a part existing and part proposed elevation, with the existing to the right and the proposed to the left. It indicates the proposal to remove the non-original rockery elements from the sandstone inner bowl, the reinstatement of the 4 cast iron urns with aloe vera plants, and the repainting of the fountain to reflect what is believed to be the original colours. Can I have the next slide, please? Moving on to the photographs, this is a view of the fountain in its current condition. Next slide, please. This photo provides a close-up of the base of the fountain, showing the ornamental rock which is to be removed, and also the pillars in which the cast iron vases would be reinstated. Next slide, please. This next slide shows the 3-tiered upper section of the fountain, showing the current condition and its colours. And can I have the final slide, please? And this final photograph is taken from slightly further away, showing the fountain in its wider context on the High Street. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. Any questions for our case officer? No, in that case, we're in session. Members, Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks, Chair. I have to apologise to the Planning Application Committee. When this came in March, I did see that street art was actually quite different, and maybe people might take that into consideration. But having a look back at that, it looked pretty awful, actually. So I'm kind of glad that the Planning Applications Committee refused that side of things. However, on this one, I do see it as a planning application and not a funding application, as has been suggested by the Planning Officer, and should agree with the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you. If there are no alternative views, we'll make a unanimous decision. The committee confirm the decision, please, Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. Members have agreed to approve the application subject to the condition detailed in the report.
Thanks very much, members. We come to 3 different agenda items now for noting. Agenda item number 7, and I'd be grateful if we didn't engage in a discussion about this particular agenda item. It's for noting only. If anyone has any questions or want to discuss the matter, I would suggest they speak to Mr. Sutty or Laura offline. So, appeal decision for noting. The decision was subsequently the appeal to Scottish Government ministers, and he dismissed the appeal and refused planning permission. That was for the siting of 2 residential caravans retrospective at land adjoining to Seal Villa, Lonmouth Road, Dumfries. Agenda item number 8, also for noting. Again, it's the boat shed, and we're asked to note that a call-in direction for 21/1817/4 has been issued. The Scottish ministers will be notified of the committee, or the decision will be notified to this committee in due course. So that was called in by Scottish ministers. We were minded to approve this application against advice from SCEPA, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency. So Scottish ministers want to look at this, and they will let us know the outcome. And agenda item 9 is one that came before members twice. The applicant has demonstrated that the shed was in place long before legislation required applications, so no further action will be taken. That concludes the business today, members, other than the exempt item which Emma and I have agreed to take. We'll have a 15-minute recess to let members read these 3 pages of this document. Then we will convene, and maybe at that time be the best time to discuss, but Councillor Campbell does have something to say.
Yeah, and just to correct the record, my statement earlier on, I said that some members didn't receive the documents. They did receive the documents, they just couldn't access it. So just to make the record straight, Chair, thank you.
Thanks very much, John. And all members not present have been had the email with an attachment for their benefit and consideration. 9 members that were present at the determination will decide, but all members are invited and can be present should they wish. So a 15-minute recess. And, Sean, please.
Yeah, it was really just to confirm, Chair, that the exempt item, there's a separate invite in Teams to join that, not this one.
It's a separate item, Sean, and they have been sent out to every member. I'll get Tracy to resend them, will I?
No, he's saying it's a different Teams invite.
Oh, it's a different team. Is that what you're saying? Yes, it is indeed. Aye.
Yes, it was just so that all members on Teams know that. Yeah.
Aye, thanks very much for that, Sean. Yeah, aye, it's a different Teams invite, and we will see you at 12:05. Thanks very much, members.